Imagine you are the most famous man in the world. Your soldiers would walk through fire for you. You have conquered entire nations, but the government you serve has just sent you an order. Surrender your army, give up your power, and come home alone. They say if you obey, you will be safe. But you know the truth. The moment you are alone, your enemies will kill you. So, what do? Do you lay down and die? Or do you start a war that will destroy your country? In 49 BC, one man faced this exact choice, and the decision he made at a small Italian river changed the world forever. Welcome to Mr. M Historian, where empires rise, republics fall, power corrupts, and one decision made in a single moment can change the course of history forever. For nearly 5 centuries, the Roman Republic stood as a dominant force. It was a complex system of checks and balances, with elected officials and a powerful Senate, designed to prevent any one man from seizing total control. It emerged victorious against Carthage in the grueling Punic Wars. It expanded into Greece and razed Corinth. It methodically dismantled every major opponent in its path, from the Macedonian phalanxes to the Seleucid empires. However, by the dawn of 49 BC, the most significant threat was not coming from a foreign power. It was a Roman commander, positioned at Italy's northern frontier, leading an army devoted not to the Senate and people of Rome, but to him personally. He awaited a single, pivotal choice. That man was Gaius Julius Caesar. The small, meandering river before him was about to become a landmark in world history, a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. For nearly a decade, Caesar had been engaged in the Gallic Wars. His campaigns were brutal and efficient, leading to immense casualties and the enslavement of countless people. He had pushed the Roman border all the way to the Atlantic Ocean and the Rhine River. His troops were not just loyal, they were fiercely devoted to him, their success and wealth directly tied to his command. He had forged them into one of the most effective fighting forces the world had ever seen. Back in Rome, however, the Senate viewed his growing power, fame, and wealth with alarm. His political enemies, led by Cato the Younger and his former ally, Pompey the Great, maneuvered against him. Pompey, once a partner in the unofficial ruling triumvirate, had become his primary rival for supremacy in the state. The Senate, swayed by these conservative optimates, issued a direct and final command. Caesar must give up his provincial command and his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Their calculation was simple and ruthless. Without his legions nearby to protect him, Caesar would be a civilian, stripped of his imperium and exposed to the prosecutions of his enemies. He would be almost certainly eliminated, either through exile or execution. He was confronted with a severe decision at Ravenna, his base of operations. Accept the Senate's order, risk prosecution, loss of status, financial ruin, and potential death. Reject the Senate's order, start a civil war, dismantle the republic his ancestors had built, and risk lasting condemnation as a traitor to Rome itself. He weighed his options, discussing them with his closest officers. He opted to defy them. The Rubicon was an unremarkable stream in northern Italy, a simple boundary between the province of Cisalpine Gaul, which Caesar governed, and Italy proper. Yet, Roman law was explicit. Any general commanding an army was forbidden from crossing it. To do so would break the sacred pomerium, the boundary of the city, with a military force, an act that would be interpreted as an invasion, a declaration of war against the Roman government itself. Historical sources, like the Greek historian Plutarch, describe the scene vividly. At the riverbank, on a seemingly quiet evening, Caesar stopped. He is said to have spent a long time in his tent, weighing the immense consequences of the step he was about to take. He reportedly discussed it with his friends, calculating the disasters that his crossing would bring upon all mankind. Behind him stood his loyal veteran soldiers from the 13th Legion, men ready to follow him into any conflict, their fortunes tied to his success. Ahead were his political enemies, Pompey's forces, and a government that actively sought his downfall. Then, in a moment of dramatic decision, he pushed aside his doubts. He reportedly spoke the well-known phrase in Greek to those around him, "Anaritho kaibos," let the die be cast. He then led his army across the shallow waters under the cover of darkness. With that single, deliberate step, he committed himself and Rome to an unavoidable conflict. Word of his advance spread like a wildfire through the Italian countryside. The news sparked immediate and widespread panic in Rome. Caesar was on the march toward the city with a battle-hardened army, and no one knew his exact intentions. His swift advance, a strategy of rapid movement to seize momentum, caught his enemies completely off guard. Pompey, a celebrated military leader but one who had not been on a campaign in years, made a startling announcement. He declared that he could not defend the city and that the Senate and all officials should abandon Rome. He quickly departed from Italy, heading first to Brundisium and then to Greece, hoping to raise a massive army from the eastern provinces to challenge Caesar. The Senate, along with many nobles, also fled the capital in chaos. Caesar subsequently entered Rome without facing any military opposition, taking control of the state treasury to fund his campaign. This was merely the opening act. The ensuing conflict was a world war that would spread across several regions, including Spain, where Caesar defeated Pompey's legates, then Greece, and later Egypt and North Africa. It was a war of Roman against Roman, legion against legion. The decisive clash came at Pharsalus in central Greece in 48 BC. Despite being outnumbered, Caesar's seasoned veterans decisively defeated Pompey's larger but less cohesive force. Pompey escaped the battlefield, a broken man, and fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the boy king Ptolemy XIII. The Egyptian court, however, saw him as a political liability. Upon his arrival, he was killed on the shore, his head severed from his body. When Ptolemy's advisors later presented his signet ring and then his severed, pickled head to Caesar as a gift, they expected gratitude. Upon receiving this, Caesar reportedly showed great distress. He wept, not for the man who was once his son-in-law and partner, but for the state to which the Republic had descended. He ordered Pompey's death avenged and had his killers executed. Following these events, Caesar's path took him to Egypt, where he became entangled in a civil war and famously allied with Cleopatra. He then conducted a swift campaign against a hostile king in Asia Minor, coining the phrase Veni, Vidi, Vici. He finally returned to Rome after defeating the last of the Pompeian forces in Africa, holding unchallenged authority over the entire Roman sphere. He was appointed dictator, initially for a decade to enact reforms, and eventually for an indefinite term, making him effectively a monarch in all but name. His initiatives were wide-ranging and aimed at stabilizing the state. His reforms included establishing a new, more accurate solar calendar, the Julian calendar, still used in its orthodox form today. He initiated programs to distribute land to his veterans and the urban poor to alleviate social tensions. He also planned grand projects, like the rebuilding of Carthage and Corinth as Roman colonies. However, holding absolute power often attracts significant danger, and his assumption of lifelong dictatorship alienated many traditionalists who still clung to the ideal of the Republic. On the Ides of March, the 15th of March, in 44 BC, a large conspiracy of senators, led by Brutus and Cassius, put their plan into action. They surrounded him in the Senate chamber just days before he was to leave for another war, and they stabbed him numerous times. According to the historian Suetonius, he died at the base of a statue of his former rival Pompey. The Republic was not restored. The assassins had killed the tyrant but had no plan to revive the old system. The power vacuum and resulting chaos led to another 13 years of bloody civil wars. Ultimately, Caesar's adopted heir, the shrewd and capable Octavian, emerged victorious over all rivals, including Mark Antony and Cleopatra. He became Augustus, the inaugural Roman emperor, transforming the shattered republic into a stable autocracy. The Rubicon itself was geographically insignificant, a minor river whose name might have been lost to history. The act of crossing it, however, marked the end of a political structure that had evolved and endured for approximately 5 centuries. It was the point of no return. Caesar's decision illustrates a fundamental principle of political power. When a military leader's primary allegiance is to personal ambition rather than to the governing institutions, the foundation of a republic is already compromised. The soldiers' loyalty had shifted from an abstract ideal of Rome to a concrete person who paid them and led them to victory. The act of crossing was not the fundamental problem. It was merely an indicator, a final symptom. The underlying disease was a military force bound to an individual, not to the state. This was a direct result of decades of social and economic inequality that the Republic's institutions had failed to address. The Roman Republic, in its traditional form, never regained its former structure. It died on the banks of that small river, replaced by a new order. This remains a critical and lasting lesson for any representative government, that institutions must command the ultimate loyalty of their armies, and that ambition, unchecked, can dismantle what centuries have built. From the battlefield of Hannibal to the Senate floor with Caesar, from the fall of Carthage to the crossing of the Rubicon, this is the definitive story of how a mighty empire was forged and an ancient republic died. If you want to understand how power truly operates, how ambition, money, and personal loyalty can shape the course of history, then be sure to subscribe and like.